Hello, everyone. So my favorite podcast ended. I'm not doing well, and I want to talk about it. My Favorite Murder came out in 2016, and it was, reaching the top charts. I tried listening to it, and I'm very, very grateful to My Favorite Murder for introducing me to a much better and much funnier podcast, We'll See You in Hell, hosted by comedian Joe Derosa and writer Patrick Walsh. And I started listening in 2016. We'll See You in Hell, I believe, started in 2015. And I instantly fell in love with it. They're super funny, two of the funniest dudes, and I have become extremely picky with comedy. I'm extremely depressed. I just don't laugh a lot anymore. But I really like their banter. I think what's really unique about their podcast is that they were new friends. So essentially they met, and then, a short time later, they were like, I love movies, you love movies, let's start a podcast. It started off reviewing horror movies. And I don't like horror movies, but this podcast was a kind of the gateway for me to watch horror movies. And now I watch a lot of horror movies because of this podcast. I'm still not a horror buff. It's not my favorite genre by a long shot, but I do enjoy horror now because of this podcast. Their first 10 or so episodes are my favorite episodes from like 2015. And they started off reviewing horror movies, watching horror movies, and doing a commentary for them. So their episodes were long, like an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And it's some of the funniest things that I have ever heard to this date. That's the thing about this podcast. Like, I've listened to this podcast probably nearly every day since 2016. It's this weird feeling because I feel like I have a personal connection to the hosts. And I don't. I know I don't. But it feels like I do because I have been listening to them nearly every day for almost 10 years. I am familiar with like intimate details of their lives and the story arc of their lives and their careers. It started off when they were in their 30s, when they were just drinking, having fun, watching movies. And then over time, it's like, oh, we're getting older. They're getting into their 40s. They have to start being more careful about their health. And I'm following it, and all these fans are following the arcs of their lives, kind of cheering them on. You get some trolls here and there saying like, fuck these dudes or whatever. You start to really feel like you have a connection to these guys. Over 9 years, for me, it's like I have collected intimate details about their lives on a daily basis, on a weekly, monthly basis for years. All they really collected for me was money. I'm not saying that to shit on them at all. I'm saying that's how it is. As a consumer, if you like someone's music, you pay to listen to their music. You pay streamers to be able to watch TV shows and movies. That's what consumerism and art is. But podcasts are really unique, certain podcasts, because although they review horror movies, they begin with the chit chat. We hear these details about their lives. If you're interested in this podcast, the first 10 or so are gold. Up through 2019, it's golden, in my opinion, because they're in the same room and they're really funny. The banter is gold for me. They're both like depressed. They both shit on each other and shit on themselves. That's what resonated with me and a lot of the fans. Around 2020, when COVID hit, they both lived in LA. Then Joe left LA. He moved to East Coast. And they decided to keep the podcast going over Zoom. And so they went through some growing pains, but me and a lot of the fans were grateful that they kept the podcast going. They kept it going until 2025. Some of the spark left. I'm just being honest. It began to feel like a different show. But I still showed up for the podcast. We all showed up for the podcast for years and years and years. And then finally, recently, 2025, they put up this post. They're like, we just passed our 10-year anniversary. We want to end on a high note. We're done. So after these four last episodes, we're done. And I gotta say, like, a lot of the fans are really devastated. And it's interesting It's really sad. I'm reading through all these comments. So I'm not currently on Instagram or Facebook, but I am on the Patreon. Reading through the comments, a lot of us are really bummed out, myself very much included. To some of the fans, it's just like, oh, it's just a show that I listen to. And I think that's the healthy way to go about it. But for some people like myself, I have listened to the podcast all the way through at least 20 times, probably more. It's one of those things where I just start from the beginning and go all the way to the most recent episode, then start from the beginning. And then it's almost like insanity, just doing it over and over and over again. And Pat Walsh mentioned this in kind of a recent episode. It was really insightful. He said he can't stand the silence. If he's in the restroom, he's listening to music or a podcast. If he's walking to the restroom, he can't stand the silence. So he puts on a podcast or music. And that's how I am too. And I put on this podcast, walking to the restroom, going to the restroom, I'm listening to this podcast. Taking a shower, I'm listening to this podcast. Driving to and from work, I'm listening to this podcast. I'm playing a video game, I'm listening to this podcast. Almost every waking minute, this podcast is on loop for me. It's just comforting to hear them, to hear their conversational tones and their banter and their jokes and their laughs. I'm listening to this constantly for 9 years, since 2016. And then all of a sudden, it's just going to be cut off. It's done. It's over. It's a very weird feeling. So it's interesting because I'm not sure exactly when the podcast boom happened, but let's say it's around 2016. I think that's when Serial and My Favorite Murder started. So there was a podcast boom. So if you've been listening to a podcast since 2016, we're coming up on that 10-year mark. And then podcasts are going to end. For one reason or another, they're probably going to end. It's just a sad thing because, for example, the TV show Friends. I think it lasted like 10 seasons or something like that. I like the show. I'm not a huge avid fan, but I enjoyed the show. So that show ended, and it was sad, I'm sure. But I don't feel like I have an intimate connection with Jennifer Aniston, or Joey. You know what I mean? It's a show. They're TV stars. I watched it, and I don't feel like I have that personal connection. Same with movie stars. But podcasts are like a little different. Like I went to a live show, their first live show in LA, and I met Joe and Pat, and a lot of the fans met him, and we had a great time. And then I went to a show of Joe's. He does stand-up comedy. And then I saw Pat there, and he recognized me. And it's like, that's neat. That's cool. We're not friends. I would say me and Pat are very, very distant, semi-pseudo-fictional acquaintances. You know what I mean? We're not friends, but he recognized me, and that's cool. Joe is a very cold person. He doesn't know my name. He hates his fans. Just kidding. So podcasts are an interesting thing because you think you have these connections with them, and you kind of do, but you kind of really don't, because at the end of the day, we're listening to them a lot, and they don't. It's a one-way street. So imagine if you've been listening to Stuff You Should Know for, I don't even know how long it's been on, it 15, 18, 20 years, but one day it's going to stop, or it might stop, or one of the hosts will be like, hey, I'm done. And then they'll have to hang it up or get a new host, and then the banter is going to be off. It's going to be weird. I think some people are going to be oddly devastated about it. And I am oddly devastated about this because, again, this has been a huge part of my life since 2016. I told my wife, she doesn't really understand, like she's not a podcast person. That's another thing. My wife is not a podcast person. My mom is not. My brother is not. My friend is not. Some people are not, and some people are. Some people listen to podcasts a lot throughout the day, every day. For me, it's just I listen to this podcast a disturbing amount, to be honest, an unhealthy amount. There have been some moments where I had to be like, you have to take a break. This is insane. The amount that you've listened to these same episodes over and over and over again. You have to take a break. Reading through the comments, like there's some people who said like my father passed away and this podcast helped me through my grief. another comment said, like, I discovered this podcast right after my brother died, and this podcast helped me. My own story, I was driving one time. I'm very depressed, and I was crying while driving. And then I stopped crying, and then I put on We'll See You in Hell, and then they were making me laugh. This podcast has really brought a lot of joy to a lot of people over a long time. I don't know, psychologically, it is interesting because podcasts are unlike any other medium. I think it's kind of up to us, up to listeners, up to fans to purposely and intentionally put distance between ourselves and the podcast, because I became obsessed. I really did. To the point where now I'm like emotionally devastated that this thing is going to be done. It feels like a death, and it's not. It feels like a breakup, but it's not. Because it's that thing, that feeling of hearing the new episodes on a weekly, on a monthly basis, and now all of a sudden it's just going to stop. So it's like a breakup where like we're not going to hear from them anymore. It's like a death where we're not going to hear from them anymore. Am I exaggerating? Kind of. But this podcast is not huge. It's not My Favorite Murder. It's not Smartless. It's not Conan Has a Friend. It's not a huge podcast, but it has a small but extremely loyal, extremely dedicated fan base. You know, we donate to the Patreon. It eventually went off the free episodes, and it went to Patreon only. And we would listen every month, and a lot of us are just really bummed out. So it's interesting. So if you are a podcast person, just know, just be prepared that one day and one day soon, your favorite podcast might just say, hey, we're calling it quits. I will say I wish that they had given a little more heads up to the fans, because the second that everyone realized the show was ending, the show had ended, if that makes sense. Because if you read the post, it says, the podcast is ending. Here's the last 4, and we're done. So as soon as we realized it's ending, it's ended. I think I would have appreciated a month's notice, and 6 months, like, hey, we're going to stop at the end of the year. And again, the reason why these guys are so cool is because they did whatever they wanted. They jumped from studio to studio, and they were never happy with the different studios. So finally, they just went Patreon only, and they did their own thing. And they're like, okay, we're going to charge this month. You can jump on or not. And a bunch of us jumped on. So they can do whatever they want. They don't owe us anything. Really, they don't. But honestly, it also kind of sucked for the fans that it was so sudden. Like, we're waiting for the August episodes. Waiting. Then finally, towards the end of the month, yeah, we're done. Here's the last 4. We're done. It's an interesting time. Podcasts are an interesting medium. Let me know if this resonates with you at all. Maybe not. You know, again, I respect the people who are like, yeah, I listen to this podcast occasionally. When a new one comes out, I'm like, okay, I'll listen to it in a month. Whereas someone like me and a bunch of us fans were like, we're avid listeners, and we listen right away to the new episodes and then listen to the backlog on repeat. It's unhealthy, to be honest. I listened to this podcast a disturbing amount, and now it's done. So honestly, it feels like there's going to be a void. And this is very much first world problems. I know that, but a lot of us are dealing with mental health problems, and this is going to sound strange, but this is one of the constants that has been in our lives for a long time. In my case, since 2016. You know, TV shows, movies, video games come and go, etc., but this is something that has been a part of my life nearly every day for 9 years. So I don't know, it's an interesting thing. It's very sad. So also, I try to listen to new podcasts, and I pretty much hate every other podcast out there. And I know I gotta give them a chance, but I try to listen, and 10-15 seconds in, and I am enraged at these people trying to be funny who think they're funny, and you're not funny. You're not funny. I know I have to open my heart and my soul and my mind and my brain and try to give other people a chance, but this was like the one podcast that I truly did not hate. Truly, I loved. They have the back catalog there. We'll See You in Hell, hosted by Joe Derosa and Patrick Walsh. Check it out. It's done. It's over. It's a heck of a run, 10-year run. Thanks for all the laughs, and I hope to see whatever future projects and current projects that you have. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and say hi to your pets for me.